but I want to go back to the banking crisis. Our next guest, Andy Puzder, was the former CEO of CKE Restaurants, which owned restaurants like Carl's Jr. He is accusing quote-unquote woke-obsessed bankers in Biden's spending spree for the historic banking collapse that warns taxpayers that they're going to end up picking up the check. Andy joins us now. Andy, you have an op-ed out this morning that pairs so nicely with this article from Politico. Basically, they put out this headline today that says how Biden saved Silicon Valley startups inside the 72 hours that transformed the U.S. Man, it's great to have friends like Politico that rush to your defense. They're making the case, clearly, the Biden administration, that is, that this is not a bailout. Is it a bailout or not?
No, it's definitely a bailout. I mean, where do they think the money's going to come from for these depositors? Where do they think the money's going to come from to rescue this bank? Now, if they wanted to do it without taxpayer dollars, there actually was a very good solution to that. They had an offer to buy the bank. But we've got Biden appointees on the FDIC who don't like bank mergers. So rather than letting a merger occur, which would have solved these problems and perhaps saved Silicon Valley, he's now out trying to get taxpayers to cover the costs of getting these depositors out of trouble. And who knows who else he wants to get out of trouble. These tech people in Silicon Valley are big Democrat supporters. They were big Biden supporters. So I don't think you should be surprised if taxpayer dollars head that way. And I'm certainly not going to be surprised. I'm absolutely convinced that's what he intends to do.
I want to play something that Shark Tank star Kevin O'Leary said about this banking collapse and how Biden responded to it. Listen.
What effectively happened over the weekend is that he nationalized the American banking system. It's no longer a risk. It's no longer private in any sense. It is now backstopped by the government, ultimately the taxpayer. So it doesn't matter how bad you are as a bank manager. If you thought putting your money into bank stocks was a good idea, you should change your mind this morning forever. Right. I would never put my money into a bank stock ever again.
Okay, do you agree? Has he changed banking forever here? Is, at the end of the day, the president rewarding bad management?
Well, it is rewarding bad management. It's really taking risk out of the banking sector. And who assumes that risk, to get back to the point about, Politico, which is really the most biased publication in the country. But to get back to Politico claiming that Biden saved saved Silicon Valley without taxpayer money, where's the money going to come from to backstop all the banks in the United States, which is basically what he's trying to do? Look, this really is just another emergency, like Afghanistan, like the Ukraine, like surging inflation. This is another emergency that we have to deal with because we don't have competent people in the White House who understand the economy, who understand the advantages of a capitalist economic system, and who want to convert our economic system to something much closer to the socialist countries, which have all obviously failed repeatedly. But we have nobody in the White House who's competent to understand this problem or deal with it.
So I want to get back to this op-ed. The headline of your op-ed in the Daily Mail is woke-obsessed bankers and the president's mad spending juggernaut fueled this banking tsunami. But guess what? You pick up the tab. So there's been a lot of folks on the right who are basically saying this woke obsession, this ESG agenda is partly to blame. Explain why that's the case.
Well, the real problem here goes back to all of the government spending, including the now ironically named American Rescue Plan back in March of 2021, the $1.9 trillion spending spree, followed by the ridiculously named Inflation Reduction Act. But all of that government spending drove inflation. And of course, when inflation went up, we all knew the Fed was going to have to increase interest rates. And this isn't just me saying this or, Art Laffer or Steve Moore or Larry Kudlow. It was Larry Summers, Jason Furman, Steve Radner, all Obama Clinton era economists saying inflation is coming, interest rates are coming, they're going to surge. This bank invested in long-term bonds that carried a higher interest rate than short-term bonds, but you can't, if interest rates go up, their value drops because you can't sell them for as much as bonds are currently selling for that have higher yields. So the bank ignored the interest rate problem. They ignored the needs of their customers, who were these tech firms. These tech firms depend on venture capital for their funding. the venture capital is very, very vulnerable to high interest rates. It dries up. So it dried up in late 2022. They ignored the needs of their businesses, which were going, first of all, deposits weren't coming in because the funding stopped, but they should have known their customers were going to need to take money out to run their businesses. Now, all of this happened because they ignored this because the people that were in risk management, well, first of all, they didn't have a risk manager from May of 2022 until January of 2023. And the people they did have in risk management were all trying to implement these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and they were making these ESG commitments. We're going to lend $5 billion to sustainable companies. So their real focus was on DEI and ESG, not on interest rates going up, which everybody who'd been to a grocery store knew was happening, or the needs of their customers, which they certainly should have known. Another part of this is that the San Francisco Fed was doing quarterly stress tests on the bank, and they apparently didn't catch any of this, which is absolutely ridiculous. They clearly weren't doing their job. You know, Elizabeth Warren says we need more regulation. Well, the ones we had weren't being enforced. If they had been enforced, if these people had competently done their job, we wouldn't be sitting where we're sitting today. So it's and part of the problem is, of course, that the Fed has been increasingly interested in climate change and the impact that would have on the country's economy, instead of doing their basic job, which is to make sure these banks were secure and could deal with the demands of their depositors. So it's a combination of events, people just ignoring reality because they weren't focused on reality. They were focused on this, climate make-believe.